Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we have an all-new grab bag, games that we've been playing this week, and we're here to chat about them. And, we also have a game that lends itself to a film, Neil, that you saw recently and kind of like capitalizing on a trend that in the gaming side of things has been around for a while and in internet culture in general, but with the recent release of a movie that's kind of capitalizing on this phenomena. It's coming to, the masses, if you will, outside of the sort of niche corner of horror and whatnot. So what film did you see and what game sort of like inspired you to dive into this one?
Oh, yeah, it was like a chicken and egg thing with this. I think it was because obviously I knew the film was coming and I thought, well, I don't know, I had to sort of see more about it, which was, of course, Backrooms, which is the Kane Parsons film. Obviously Kane was known as Kane Pixels in YouTube Spaces and made these sort of short videos, made I think in Blender, where just basically like found footage capturing of like stuff in the backrooms, which I feel like I don't have to explain to anyone listening, but yeah, it was like if you know liminal spaces and all that stuff, that's like a big part of it. And I think I don't know if we ever said it sort of publicly on here or if it was just background stuff, but I think when that stuff first started coming around, like all I saw was all the copycat stuff, and I just felt like there's too much of this nonsense, and like I don't care for any of it. It all just seems like quite rightly like a bunch of people taking an idea and getting it wrong. And I think there was, when I was doing film reviews and a festival thing, like there was a found footage film done by some amateur filmmakers trying to capture that idea, but doing it in like a working mall, which didn't work because you could just like see people and stuff moving around like normal. So it's like, I get the idea of like, oh, I'm lost in a looping mall. It's like, you're not, you're just like going up and down a bunch of stairs sort of thing. And and I think it wasn't until we covered Pools, where I really sort of clicked in with the idea of all that, which obviously Pools is like based on a very specific kind of thing in that sort of arena. And so, I fell in love with that. Very short game, but it's like, the atmosphere, it was perfect for me. And I think mainly because it was about just exploring and going through it, and it wasn't really about threats. And I don't know, the games that I saw just tended to be like, it's about surviving threats. And I don't know, I just spent like the week thinking, well, what would work? What would be an interesting game? And I picked up Escape the Backrooms on Steam, thinking, well, I could try that out as it's a co-op game, and it's got almost like a cooperative sort of puzzle sort of element to it. But then, of course, it sort of stealth drops on consoles, I think, on Friday, on the same day as the film came out. So, smart. So I got it there as well, and especially as it's cross-play. I don't know which one to talk about first, I guess. I
guess, like, in brief, how does the film Backrooms, like, does it do justice to the notion of backrooms and liminal space, or is this, kind of like another example of much like a lot of the copycat backroom stuff we've seen that maybe doesn't truly understand at the core of what makes that subgenre so unique and interesting?
Yeah, I think because Kane Parsons obviously has this history in this, has built up, lore that is almost accepted in that sort of realm, like with his videos at a ridiculously young age of about 15, 16, I think, as well. Then, and directing this movie at 20 is like quite a strong swing, and for A24, like as everyone will probably know by now, the records, like the youngest director to have number one movie at the box office, I think one of A24's most successful openings ever. And you could turn around and go, well, that's what they said about the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and that wasn't necessarily good. It was about the fan service. But no, Kane clearly, because of what he's done, gets the idea of what's unnerving about liminal spaces. And obviously, with the budget being higher than just what he would have done at home, he's able to recreate things with sets and things like that. So while there's digital work, there's also actual set work. So you really feel that sense of space properly like that. And very smartly, like anything that's, a bit more, I suppose you would say, supernatural about it and very offbeat, it's very reserved. Lots of hiding stuff. It's kind of blends like the found footage nature of like his videos from before with like a human story, like of two characters and their personal traumas and how that kind of connects to their time, discovering the backrooms and being in the backrooms. Which I didn't care for as much. I think not because I don't think you can't do that. I just think that everything we've seen so far, any story has been kind of like in the background and like, oh well, this happened in this year and that happened that year, and yet you maybe see like snippets of these things in these videos, but in that sense, they feel more like found footage and they kind of work like that, including like a here and now kind of feel to the story, even though it's not. It's very clearly quite 90s-esque set, so in terms of like what's going on. It's like despite the actors, it's just not really doing it for me in that front. But as vessels for like experiencing this thing and like wandering into it for the first time, like they really sell that wonderfully. Like just the amazement and the choices as well in terms of how like what is shown and in what format, and like in terms of like walking through like a wall that basically takes you into into the backrooms, like in a no clipping sort of situation. It's done smartly and handled right, and I really did dig that sort of atmosphere to it and just how odd it felt for a blockbuster film. Yeah, I mean it's not really. I mean it's an A24 horror movie that was made for what, $10 million, and but because of the crowd that want to see it. Like I went, it was absolutely rammed. It was full of people, and people. I've seen it noted today by someone like online. It's like people going to the cinema didn't see anyone on their phone, anything like that. Like I think when I went to see Obsession, I sort of made a joke about that there were people like a few tiers down from me who were just constantly on their phone the entire film, watching videos. And it's like, I'd love to have known what their review was afterwards, because like I would love to just turn around and go, "You're a liar! You didn't see the damn film," sort of thing. But yeah, here it's like, considering it was a young audience, and there's this expectation that everyone is like, "Oh, young audience is the problem." They're not, I might add, but they are generally the ones that talk more, I find. But here, any talking was done in a very small way, in a very quick, hushed way, to sort of get a point across and done like you would do normally if you are seeing a movie with someone. Sometimes that happens, and everyone really got into it. Different compared to like when, say, I saw Iron Lung and we talked about that before. It's like people were there obviously for Markiplier more than they were for Iron Lung, the game. But the Backrooms, obviously everyone has all this experience with it in different ways, as we're going to go into. As much as there is like creepypasta stuff and like the video series that Kane did, but the world of video games, in terms of how many, like if something exists on the internet that is like horror based and faddy, if you will, and builds up a lore, it will find its way into some space. I think Escape the Backrooms began as a game in another game, because I was talking to my daughter about it, and she was like, "Oh yeah, that's by this person, and they did this thing and another thing." I was like, "Yeah, I mean, my kids, she especially, were just constantly like very excited about the idea and very sad they couldn't go see the movie because it was just slightly too young." But yeah, I mean, in terms of capturing that sense of the background and that unease and that surreal thing, it's like, it does a great job of that. And when you consider it is a film by a 20-year-old whose experience has mostly been doing online videos, it's like remarkable. And I would the only complaints I would have are those sort of writing ones for the characters, and they're not even his problem. Like the writer was a pretty seasoned writer, so it's just a case of, they wanted to add a bit more to it, and I get that because I think it would just feel a bit too theme park ride if you didn't have something to hang your hat on with it. But yeah, Mark Duplass shows up for a bit as well as a scientist who's in stuff like the creep tapes and that, and yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to call it akin to something like David Lynch did in terms of like there being a very clear tone and feel to it that isn't like regular cinema. It just kind of makes you feel like odd with it, and you feel like you're seeing things that are a bit like, and yeah, it has a little portion where it kind of loses you, I think, and it is when it is really focusing on like the stories of the characters more than it is on the backrooms themselves. And yeah, that's when it sort of falters. But then it does sort of come back strong with like some really weirdo, like surreal stuff, and like it's really well done considering again such a small budget for a film like that. It just feels so confident like that.
Right.
Now, after that, I was like really excited to sort of get into Escape the Backrooms and sort of see, okay, so a bit of exploring about that and trying that. Now, this is, as I said, is a game that is about co-op and like escaping things and like solving a puzzle of an area to sort of find your way out and get to the next one. It's more of an escape room game than it is a backrooms game. It just happens to have levels like that. I mean, it's a nice surprise when you do get stuff that is outside the usual stuff, like the yellowed room, office style rooms and stuff like that, which, as I was saying to you before we started, like I do find that stuff to be a bit tired now because so many people have done it. So I've always found it more interesting when it goes to different places and does do different things with that. It's why I like pools so much, is because it was, I have that feeling for swimming pool spaces a lot more than I do office spaces. Probably because I worked in spaces like that, late at night in emptiness, and it's like, it's the reality of it's a bit more unnerving than that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think a few things were interesting about it though, like the sense of the unexpected beyond that initial idea of what you do expect, like from the game, like to suddenly discover like a new level, having escaped one, and it's like, oh, okay, so we're doing this, but it stops feeling like the backrooms, especially from what the film kind of gave me in terms of like the idea of what it is. So I didn't really care for that part of it, but it was nice to sort of at least be like, okay, so I didn't expect to be here or I'm there, and you'd have some fun ideas. And then it does go back to sort of areas that you're like, oh yeah, I get this, I understand this. Yeah, and the co-op aspect as well, you sort of end up like, obviously if you're not playing with people you're just kind of dropping into people's games or having people drop into your games. And one of the funniest ones was pretty much the first time I dropped in to a game where 3 people were already playing. They were some way in, obviously it was dark, flashlights going everywhere, creatures everywhere, and like before I could even talk to them, I was dead. And 2 minutes later, they were just, someone sort of said, "Oh, someone else joined," sort of thing. I just pretty much just left in embarrassment, like just
you slipped in and then you slipped out.
That's it, yeah. So, which wasn't the greatest first impression for me, and playing it solo was like trying to figure out what to do because it's not very obvious. You're kind of having to figure it out on the fly. Yes, there are videos online which I did sort of utilize after that to sort of get me through the initial over the hump, if you will, for those beginning sections. But yeah, like once you understand that, I think as well, you kind of get the idea that to think outside the box or even inside the box of like basic fetch quests, and you've got to do this thing and there'll be an obstacle in some way, whether it be like an entity or like and that changes up from place to place, and that's quite refreshing. Like it does feel more like a series of different game ideas dragged together than it does a Backrooms game for me,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's still enjoyable for what it is, and like many games like that, where you have almost an escape room style thing, having other people and discussing with them, like, especially with strangers, like it is quite fascinating, like to sort of like figure stuff out together, like and yeah, unfortunately, like is it because people have played it for so long, you do get the people that like, oh, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. They know what to do, and that's it. Like, kind of takes
Right.
the fun out of it a bit. That you just kind of being dragged along for the ride,
Hmm.
and it feels more like that aforementioned sort of funhouse ride that you're going on rather than playing the game. Yeah,
Well,
like it's enjoyable. Yeah, but go on. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, I was kind of hesitant at first to. I haven't gotten around to playing it, but like even to consider getting into it because I was kind of like, part of the reason why pools I think stood out for both of us was like the variety, right? It's not just the sort of like yellow tinted office, like you said, and it's not also just like traditional pools. The surrealness with which some of those environments are constructed is very much what I find to be the most interesting aspects of the Backrooms, which it sounds like maybe the film delves into a little bit in terms of just like the surreal and the bizarre and the unexpected, sort of like the depictions of what can occur in those spaces and whatnot.
Mm.
And I think for me, like the notion of a Backrooms multiplayer game, my fear was like, yeah, you're just going to be running around the yellow tinted office, but it sounds like Escape the Backrooms adopts almost like kind of like I don't know, like a flair of SCP Foundation like
Yeah,
storylines where you kind of just have this like goldfish bowl, and each one of the things that's in it is some different type of horror, theme or monster or entity, and then you're not too concerned with the reasons why all these things can operate or exist in a space. You just know that it provides a variety. Again, whether that is reflective in the environments or in the types of like threats that you're facing and trying to avoid. So I really like the idea of branching out more and maybe not being overly concerned with like this is going against the notion of what Backrooms is, or it's open for a lot more interpretation, which I think for me like makes it sound more enticing than any of the other at this point hundreds of backroom style games.
yeah. I think having a selection box of like ideas of what that should be, which is understandable because it comes from the internet and most of it is spoken, and written beforehand. So everyone kind of interprets things their own way, including, as we said, Kane Pixels, Kane Parsons, who obviously interpreted things his own way, like and created something that has almost become the canon, effectively, in so many ways for so many people. But yeah, because of the nature of it, it will splinter off in so many different ways and have many different ideas. And unfortunately, like anything where something does get popular, there will be ones that misinterpret the reason it's exciting and interesting because
Mm.
they can't sort of communicate that in the same way. Yeah, I understand that totally because the very ideas beneath stuff like the Backrooms obviously been around for many years in many different forms, and I've loved lots of like media with that in. Like I know there are people that grumble about like this is what gets famous, but not the House of Leaves, which obviously
Uh,
inspired so many things. Like I mean, in more accessible spaces in terms of video games, you have stuff like Control, which obviously takes a bit of that as well. And as you mentioned, like the SCP stuff, which again is another sort of splintering off of that sort of online folklore, effectively, of strange happenings. We've kind of gone from pretending these things were real
mm,
and like you know missightings of things and conspiracies to sort of just building up a whole new sort of legacy of ideas. And I mean that's fun. I think it is really fun, and it is, but it is a space you kind of, if you want to be into it, you really have to be into it properly to sort of get the
mm,
most out of it. Like that would, yeah. Like my days of doing that on the internet aren't quite there anymore. Like, but yeah, it does feel like a throwback to what forum culture used to be like in terms of
mm.
like coming up with different ideas and theories and stuff like that. And so I like it for that. I really do enjoy the idea of like just strange, surreal, odd, offbeat things about normal things. It's very exciting, but yeah, it's unfortunately so many of the things don't quite capture it exactly how I want it, and I'm sure that's true for anyone who's like everyone's got their own idea of what that is. It does it for them, and if it isn't represented, then they've got that. So, like I said, going back to the film, like it's a great respect to see Kane Parsons just did that film and did not lose that. In fact, if anything, I think amplified it by having it feel more like you could reach out and touch it and be a thing and a place and kind of really get the point in a way that the videos, through no fault of their own, I think have just sort of kind of had it taken away the whole point of them, like in terms of like the feeling of the space, and it's more about all this backstory and all the lore and stuff like that, which that's fine, but it is that feeling, and that to keep that feeling like on screen and keep the atmosphere is so important. And I think the film is probably the best example of that since Pools, I think, for me, like in terms of capturing that feeling that I enjoy.
Yeah, I'm hopefully going to see Backrooms this week. But the thing that I think the trailer communicated very well, and I think you've kind of more or less spoken to the film, is able to capitalize on that. Like the human element and the story of behind them and everything, like, is not that compelling. But what I thought the trailer did really well was capturing people's reaction to discovering the unknown and trying to make sense of the unknown. And like the trailer, I think, like has a very visceral portrayal of that and the sort of like madness there within of trying to like grasp something that the human mind simply just will never be able to. And I think that for me, like that's one of the biggest appeals of like liminal horror, is trying to rationalize the irrational, and along the lines of something like Skinamarink, which I think is a flawed film, but at the same time, like I think Skinamarink did a very good job of making the confusion of what is occurring like very palpable for the audience in a way that was like uncomfortable, and doing that through the majority, 85% of the time, not actually having something scary on screen, but just like being unnerving, which I think has always been the sort of impetus for the beginning of a lot of the Backrooms experiences. Naturally the noodle monster or whatever it is that's lurking around the corner is going to show up, but for a majority of the experience with those, and especially with Pools that has no monster, it's just making you uncomfortable through a sense of space that like has elements of its design and construction that are like very grounded, but things are just slightly off a little bit, and you can't quite put your finger on it until, in a majority of these games, it's quite literally like chasing you down a hallway or something. But I think that for me, like that's what I'm most excited about with Backrooms, is just like that depiction of madness, if you will, through something that, is largely filled and constructed with things that are from your own memories, or, just like common household items that are being manipulated or appearing in ways that they should never. And yet that is what is occurring there.
Yeah. I will also give a shout out, like in terms of books, to Grady Hendrix's Horror Store, I think it is, which is basically like liminal space IKEA, like, which is like as a story setting, and it works really well. Like, and again, it was one of those things I didn't know that's what it was going in, but like, yeah, it was enticing because again, it's one of those settings where I go, yeah, here is where it makes sense to me, like, and I really do enjoy that aspect of it. And I think, again, like I said, for everyone, there'll be certain parts that work like that for everyone. They'll go, okay, this location makes sense because I have this sort of connection with it, where I'm like, yeah, this is an uncanny space in some way to me. But yeah, it's. I think the sort of summation of the movie is that the thing I want out of it is that feeling like a real space that feels like you could travel through it, but also feels like it's vast beyond that. Like you have like a closeness and an intimacy that you feel like you're not like sprawling too far. Like with the movie, like while it delves into this place that seems vast, it's like it also seems like contained enough to tell the story, but like you get the sense of something more beyond it. Like that there is like just because how they frame it in terms of like what they tell you about it, it makes sense that, oh yeah, it's only a tiny portion of what we know, and there's so many more stories we could tell. And it's like that part of it was exciting. I do think that with games like Escape Backrooms, it's more of a case of, yeah, okay, like they feel like levels. They don't feel like you are just going further and further and further into like something that is just like an infinite void of weirdness and
Mm.
like mirrors of our own world sort of thing. It's like, yeah, it stages, and again, absolutely fine. I get that. Even Pools does that to a degree, but yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I'm sure, like I said, that people have different ideas of what they want.
I think at the same time, like the one really unique aspect, which is not typically the case in games, just because of the nature of games, once you're in that space or that location, like that's where you are, you're trapped effectively, even if that's not how it's described in the narrative, because that's just, you're going to be exploring this area. But like in the film, and it's alluded to, it's shown in the trailer, like the protagonist is able to enter the back rooms and then leave. And so like that, I think for me is an interesting aspect too, that kind of complements that madness aspect that I was talking about, like in the obsession aspect of it as well, right? The fact that it's like, oh, you've been introduced to this thing accidentally, and any sane person's reaction should just be, oh, I want to get the hell out of here initially. But then, your mind basically becomes infatuated with trying to understand and trying to go just a little bit further, a little bit deeper. But as I'm sure is the case in the film, like the entering and exiting of the back rooms becomes more difficult the further down you get.
Yeah, that's it. It's like it's maintaining that is important.
Yeah, but I would be interested. Unfortunately, I think the popularity of the film is probably going to lend to any number of like rip-offs of Backrooms, or maybe not rip-offs, but just like poorly thought out executions on something like Liminal Space and Backrooms. But as always, I'm sure some visionary will come through and give us something that takes a crack at that subgenre in a new and interesting way, hopefully.
I mean, probably had the new problem of like the ones with the money deciding, okay, we're getting into the space sort of now, and again, they tend to be where you really misunderstand the point, and there'll be big budget, big star flop versions of this. And I mean, to be fair, even stuff like Severance, like, kind of gets it, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Like
That's a good show.
And plays in that sort of thing, but while still telling a story. And I think, in a way, stuff like that's kind of made it more accessible too, like in terms of an adult sense. Yeah, like because audiences aren't all like just kids watching it; they are the majority audience. But I think there is a curiosity beyond that dwells from having like more things that understand the idea. I mean, you wouldn't say like Ben Stiller surely would understand that stuff, but I think he gets something that's quite similar to it, and you can find common ground with that. And they're the sort of things I want to see going forward, whether it be games or films or whatever, that get like inspired by this particular side of thing. I mean, it's not like the Backrooms is like the be all and end all, the only thing that ever came out that did this sort of stuff. It's just, it's going to be the totem pole now, the lightning rod that will sort of bring all other projects to it in that regard. Let's hope that it does inspire lots of interesting game ideas, though. That we'll see more of it.
Be cool to see like somebody like Bloober take a crack at liminal space horror or something along those lines. Just see like
they play with the surreal, so they play with changing the places, and that's a very different part of it. But yeah, like it'd be, especially I think with like how engines can like recreate real spaces quite convincingly. Like I think you could do something that really got it. It doesn't all have to be grainy, lo-fi, low poly stuff. Like you can do something that feels a bit more tangible and real with a higher engine sort of thing. But I do like the mix of like using found footage style stuff with like a cleaner sort of more real look that also still has like an unreality to it. Like even in that film, where King Parsons, like whenever there's like outside shots, like the real world and stuff, it feels unreal. Like the skylines look like Windows 98 things. Like it doesn't feel quite like any time you're watching a film that you're in reality. Like which is again goes back to that sort of David Lynch quality. And like I think there's many ways you could play with that, and especially in a game space.
We'll add it to the list of maybe it's not exactly a video game, film adaptation of a video game, but it certainly is one that's been inspired by it. So maybe can circle back to that one when I finally get around to watching it, hopefully this week. But
I think it's just so ingrained in internet culture and gaming to go so close together. Like I said, it's like I know that's how my kids know about that stuff is through video games. Is how they know about the Backrooms, how they know about any of that internet lore, and like how that's kind of fed all these other games, like in horror space, especially for kids. Where you think of Five Nights at Freddy's, even Dead by Daylight, even stuff like my daughter plays like Dandy's World, where it's all similar sort of stuff, where you have all these characters with their own backstories and their own lore and stuff, and they get really obsessed with it in a way that feels more like we used to do about like TV or books or whatever like that, and it's cool. It's nice, and they have like, and I think the internet culture can do that really well. I think, and the fact that it bleeds into games is so obvious because the people that end up making games like that tend to exist in online spaces, and so it's safe to say that they are going to sort of have some sort of bleed through.
Maybe this will also convince me to dive into some other liminal space backroom style games at the very least. But let's transition a little bit and chat about one short but very sweet game that I played. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we can chat about the other game I've been playing this week that you also have some experience with. But I'll start with Blood Orange Definitive Edition, which is and again, like I primarily picked this amongst some of the other things I played this week to chat about because I more or less figured that you would get on with it, considering this is an underwater psychological pixel art horror game in which the player basically plays someone that is on this little like pontoon boat. They don a diving suit and then they sort of descend into the ocean to investigate these ruins, armed with only a camera. And so, it more or less looks like something that was made in RPG Maker. However, like the attention to detail when you have these, close-up portraits of various dolphins and, of course, this being psychological horror, there's sort of this like madness component to it that kind of lends itself to the otherworldliness of the terrors of the deep, if you will. And so while you're doing this exploration and you are on your own, at the same time, you are sort of struggling with past traumas that occurred on the shore prior to this trip and whatnot. And so it's really just about deciphering the reality of the protagonist and the ways in which their sort of like perception of the world is being manipulated to basically give them a second chance at confronting the things that haunt them, while at the same time giving them enough agency to decide that they can either face it or shy away from it, kind of a thing. Yeah. And so, I think that it's like fairly simple. It's definitely short. It took me less than an hour. It took me about 50 minutes. And it's a game that I think would be right at home on something like Horror Bites typically. But I was just really impressed with the pixel art in this one because of the fact that, even though maybe it was an oversimplification, me saying it was something that looks like it was made in RPG Maker, when you're exploring the ruins for the first 3/4 of the game, it's like very moody and atmospheric, and it has a really great score to go along with it. That kind of just like captures the rather solemn nature of like exploring these ruins that have these wild sort of caricatures on the walls and these types of vegetation that are growing that shouldn't be growing there. And then, you may or may not encounter some dolphins that begin speaking to you in these very cryptic and sort of like Lovecraftian ways that force you to face realities that you don't necessarily want to. But then when you start delving more into the backstory of the character and, you know, the events that occurred that clearly are haunting them, like the pixel art explodes in a way in its depiction of those past events that I was really sort of surprised at the contrast because of the color palette that's used there. Because the majority of the game, again, has this dour, you know, more of almost like a survival horror sort of look to it. And then it has these bright, vibrant color palettes that are exploring moments that are memorable, but typically not for positive reasons. And then there's some like choose your dialogue responses that factor into the one of three endings that you can get. And yeah, like this was just a game that I randomly stumbled upon. And I was just really taken with like a game that is as good as this was and enjoyable as it was and doesn't outstay its welcome. And yet I'd never seen anybody talk about it. I'd never seen anybody like do a thread on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever about it. And it's just like, yeah, there are these little hidden gems that at the same time are like completely free. This was a free game. There's like I believe there's a developer pack to support it, but yeah, it was a game also that, you know, again, talking about Horror Bytes, I think it was made in like a week for a game jam. And just a really strong sense of tone and style going into something that, at the end of the day, like you could say, yeah, it's another psychological traumatized protagonist game about a protagonist that more or less like needs to decide, am I going to face this or am I not? And at the same time, like it's just presented in such a refreshingly sort of like pristine way in terms of, again, the portrayal of that art style and the sort of like music that lends itself to the melancholy nature of its narrative just made this the highlight of my week in terms of what I'd played, really.
Yeah, and it's unusual that you get, you know, an aquatic horror that isn't sea based. You know, being river based like this is, I think, which also lends to that sort of color palette as well, as you said. Where obviously it's more of a dirt brown sort of orange sort of color to the underwater sections that, yeah, give it a very different vibe to it. I mean, like I've seen the stuff that's on the surface as well, where, you know, you have a very different color palette for it, and yeah, I think that really builds that. I mean, I get that sense, you know, even looking at it, like of it being more of a river, you know, and being under there, like, yeah, it's like it's very easy to think, oh, the sea because it's deep as hell, and who knows what's down there. But like, you know, rivers can be pretty down deep and still hold lots of things, and I think there's something quite unnerving about that because they tend to be quite muddy and like hard to sort of see in a lot of cases, and yeah, I mean, the idea of it just seems bonkers as a story as well, in a good way. And those pixel art things that come up with the animations, oh wow! I mean, that's really effective stuff. And yeah, that sort of RPG Maker-esque sort of style to the game, I think, does work in terms of like setting a tone. I think we've had this with games before. We just said like that style kind of works for horror. Like if you tell it in the right way. I mean, Look Outside was a good example of like just having that sort of same viewpoint and just really like utilizing it well. It's a really simple way of like maintaining spaces and making you feel like you're moving around in them in a way that 3D spaces can do, but a lot of the sort of smaller efforts tend to be a bit more limited in detail because of that, because the time and effort to set those things up can be quite difficult. And I think, yeah, you get to have a bit more sort of detail and craft when you sort of, not diorama-esque, but yeah, like when you are scene setting, like in a sort of more 2D space.
No, absolutely. And I think on top of that, like your point about it being set in a river compared to the ocean, and that's not to say like the endless depths of the ocean aren't terrifying, as we've established with lots of coverage of you know, aquatic horror games, but there is something I think that lends itself to the environment here, with it being a river, which is a, you know, at the end of the day, can be more or less these sort of like closed almost ecosystems. There is something that is a little bit more ominous about it, in that, you know, it's something that could float away and then, you know, travel to another region. However, it stayed here. And there is like this sort of like finite depth to the environment that you're searching in. and the fact that these things that you're encountering have never left. Whereas, if it was in the middle of the ocean, then there's just a lot more freedom for things to kind of like meander away or move or whatnot. So I think for me, like that also was just like one of those minor details that, however, I think ended up being a pretty big factor in terms of just like establishing that sense of space and making it seem just a little bit more sinister and sort of unique in that regard. And also, again, like the score is really fantastic from the composer Chili Makes Music. It was just really terrific to the degree it's on Spotify, and it's well worth checking out and adding to your collection.
I probably will add that to the collection, but as well say. But yeah, I think, and also just like the Amazon itself, but like having so much stuff that is still unknown, that you could not classify it. So yeah, to take that fact and kind of put it into its waters makes sense too, which is it's a good way to sort of jump from that one idea of a classic horror to another with a sort of similar idea.
Yeah, and along the lines of like, if people like this or want to check this one out, it's well worth following the developers page on Twitter as well, because they have an upcoming game that I want to plug called Thermocline, which is basically I'll just sum it up as being essentially, like if there was a RPG version of the thing. You basically are venturing about this frigid corpse planet, and then you're going to be encountering various monsters, and you go into these classic 90s RPG combat screens with various monsters and denizens of the planet. However, it looks as well, which is not, I haven't experienced it yet, as I said, because it's upcoming, but it looks like you really have to pay attention to like your temperature. And that provides like a survival aspect to the horrors of this frigid planet. And just glancing at the Steam page has a really great looking art style for the monsters. And just like, again, I'm a sucker for those top-down 90s RPG style, kind of along the lines of Look Outside. And here it having some kind of like lineage to the thing. With, again, notably music from Chili Makes Music, and it's going to also plan to be 100% free. It makes it something I'm really looking forward to, and coming soon, but I'm hoping that means this year coming soon, because this looks quite good. And if I enjoy aquatic horror, something that is, tinged with the thing is definitely going to be something I'm going to get along with all right.
Absolutely.
So, have to report back on that one, but why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, I can chat about what else I was playing this week that you yourself have played in the past. But more on that in a moment. And we're back from our break, and I found that I had an abundance of time this weekend, and I wanted to take a break from some of the other stuff that I was playing, so I finally booted up a game that you've been recommending to me for a while, and it was one that how much I always appreciate, and I would say 99% of the time, anything you recommend to me, I get on with for one reason or another. But this was a game that, even though you'd recommended it to me, I was still a little bit hesitant. Maybe it was partially because of my love for the studio's previous game. Part of it was probably I was bitter that we don't have another entry in that series probably on the horizon. But also like just my general sort of gleam of the, not mechanics, but just like the format of this game initially did very little for me and gave me some pause. And that would be the game Marvel's Midnight Suns, which is from Firaxis, as I mentioned. They are, of course, the developers behind our beloved XCOM. And they were dabbling in the realm of card-based, turn-based strategy, which, card-based is very much out of left field if you think about their roots with XCOM. However, the attention to turn-based and the strategic layers that they are known for was clearly apparent. But for whatever reason, like, I like card-based games, I like turn-based games, but there was something about Midnight Suns being for lack of a better term, like an arena for the missions, right? The fact that you're in this small area that is nowhere near the size of some of the maps of XCOM, but it more or less is just like, you have your core cast of 3 heroes, and then you're facing off against like waves of Hydra soldiers and various villains from the Marvel universe. But there was just something about it being in an arena that I felt was like very limiting. On top of that, it boasts this new system where you can basically interact with the environment. And so you can like pick up things in an environment and hurl them at an enemy, or you can leap or vault over a barrier and then like perform a kick move, or there's explosive barrels. Like, I don't know, there was something about utilizing the environment that I just wasn't buying into for some reason. And maybe it was me thinking like, oh, well, it's taking away from the heroes themselves. Maybe it was initially viewed by me as like being clutter in an environment that was already more restrictive or condensed than I was used to in some of these turn-based games. But then I ended up spending the entire weekend with it and absolutely loved it, and couldn't stop playing it, more or less. And so I just found myself like really enamored with, their ability to take what works so well in the card-based realm of strategies and then being able to apply it to a framework that is somewhat tied to XCOM, but really it feels like a breath of fresh air that still like utilizes what that studio has done so well for so long, and applying it to, the Marvel universe and whatnot. Yeah, I kind of want to get your take on Midnight Suns and the implementation of card-based strategy and kind of like how that lands for you in the realm of strategy games.
Yeah, no, I mean, at first I was very much of the same mind where I was a bit hesitant because it seemed limited by comparison. I think part of that is because of its focus elsewhere, being deeper, and I think that's the trade-off that has to happen. But I don't know, there's so many permutations to that combat. The more you learn and the more things go on in the game, that it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I get this. And I don't know, it kind of sells a narrative back and forth that's necessary for a comic book style game. And especially with the way it's presented, because you are your sort of unnamed hunter hero, basically, that you get to make yourself. And I mean, that in itself is a great setting point. It's like you are a brand new Marvel hero in the middle of like being pals with a bunch of other Marvel heroes and like teaming up with them on missions and fighting all these things, and that itself makes it this really cool RPG that just happens to deal in like turn-based, card-based combat. That's the thing. It's like doing things that other games for Axis have done and other RPGs have done. It's just that it's using card system part of it and making it feel like that's a difference, I guess. And the environmental stuff is cool. I mean, it's playing on that idea that XCOM had in terms of like using certain things in the environment. But yeah, that sort of comboing stuff together, like within a turn-based game, is like really cool and very, very satisfying when you pull it off. And you still have that inherent danger of like, oh god, like if I've got to figure out how these moves go together, and because the enemies change in certain ways as you go on, like they'll have certain abilities that you need certain characters with you on missions. Yeah, I mean, it loses things like the death penalty of like permadeath in XCOM and stuff like that, but it's rounded off by having more of a sense of camaraderie with your fellow heroes and like getting to know them and getting to team up with them and actually forming bonds with those team players. And they all bring their own cool strategies, and just, while at first it's like, oh, I just want to have that character in battle because they're my favorite sort of thing. You just learn to appreciate characters not just because of their personalities but their abilities, and it's like the mix of the two. And because you're always part of it in most cases with your character, like yeah, it's a cool sort of personal way of doing the sort of XCOM squad based thing. And I think these things all add up to sort of make it a very refreshing take on those ideas they'd had before. And we were talking beforehand about like IO Interactive, like Hitman doing a James Bond game, and like how they applied their know-how in that arena to a blockbuster action adventure game and it working so well. And it was very much a similar thing, I think, with Midnight Suns, where I think lots of people looked at it before and went, the XCOM guys are making a Marvel game. And that audience doesn't care, like, for that kind of game, generally speaking. Let's be fair. Like, not even a game that had Wolverine and had nowhere near the hype levels that the Wolverine game that will be basically, from the same studio as the Spider-Man game studio, like, is getting and will get this very week that we're talking. And the game really didn't get the love it deserved in so many ways, and I think it is because it's a very difficult game to explain, as you kind of sort of alluded to, and how you were hesitant about it. I think it's like the proof is in the playing, because it's so particular in those things. I mean, the reason we're mentioning it at all is because it is leaning into the horror side of things. You're up against the demon Lilith, and like, you have characters who tend to be on the dark side alongside some lighter ones. Having Blade and Ghost Rider, and the redemption of Morbius in DLC. So, I mean, I also say, much like XCOM 2 with War of the Chosen, it's like the DLC characters that come out afterwards that you can kind of integrate into your story, which either weren't in it originally or were like foes for part of the game. Like, their stories individually are like really cool to add to it. Like, I know we're all exhausted with the Deadpool stuff, but like, it's like, it is quite funny in the context of this game how he like takes the piss out of the systems and the ideas behind the game, as well as like just the usual stuff. And like the addition of Storm and Venom and Morbius, just they're great. But like, characters like Magic and that, I like grew to be much more fond of, having played the game like that, and Nico Minoru as well. Like, characters that I don't really have as much knowledge of or as affinity for, but came out the other side of it going, oh wow, to the point where it's like, when Spider-Man shows up, it's like, it's great, I love Spider-Man, but like, these other people are like more interesting because they're new and things like that. And Blade is just like great, like a game that lets you be
awesome. He's one of the opening characters you get to use.
Yeah, and it's just like that you want to be friends with Blade, and like, it's a game that lets you hang out with Blade, like, to boost morale. It's just like, it sounds silly, but it works so well. And I just love like the cool demonic versions of like characters, like the Venom and the Hulk ones, and how that sort of boosts their power. And it's really cool, and just the way the story keeps moving on, and all the stakes go the way they do. Yeah, love it. Like, there's so much to love about it as a Marvel game and as a game from Firaxis, who, probably the last game that real bunch of Firaxis developers got to do together. And I think since then, with the new Civ game and anything else they've done, it's been a changing of the guard a bit. And like that, unlike, say, with IO and Hitman, where I think they will get to make a Hitman game again because they have that control over that stuff. Firaxis we're never going to get to, because 2K, and Take-Two and whatever. So, and all the people have left that studio. It's a shame, but we won't get that extra sort of XCOM goodness from them again, or even the sequel to this. I mean, Jesus, either one would have been lovely, but it's the failure of this game, unfortunately, on a sort of commercial level, I guess, given that it's Marvel, was not its fault. I think it just came in that post Avengers Endgame malaise.
And I have to say as well, outside of the strategy side of things, there's a great roster of characters, but in addition to that, like, I don't know, I feel like, as someone that spent so many years reading comics, and like in the last few years being fairly underwhelmed by maybe the quality of a lot of what I was reading, especially in the Marvel side of things, not to make this a DC versus Marvel thing. It's the type of thing where, like, I'm actually like really impressed with Midnight Suns, not only storyline, but, and I think more importantly, given that we're also inundated with like the Marvel films and everything, like the voice acting in this is really phenomenal. I think each one of the characters, again, I've only played about 5 hours. Each of the characters that I've encountered, especially the notable ones like Tony Stark, of course, and those various well-known characters like Blade and Wolverine and whatnot, like they all have voice actors that are doing those characters justice. I think, like, you're not, especially like in the case of Tony Stark, like, yeah, it's not going to be like Robert Downey Jr. exactly, but you're basically getting the best Robert Downey Jr. impersonator you could get, I think, with something like this. And so for those reasons, like the narrative outside of the whole like meeting your destiny kind of a thing, or what you have to do to scourge evil from the land, like the characters themselves are what are keeping me invested in exploring the manor outside of combat and like seeking out those extra conversations. And on top of that, like the fact that you're rewarded in that with not only more knowledge or lore about various individuals, but it affects their relationships. So, if you have these interactions with some characters like Blade, I'm trying to buddy him up so that way he performs better and we get to get some extra maybe dialogue options out of him. Whereas I learned very quickly, unfortunately, that like based on your interactions, it can be, of course, positive, but also negative. So now, just in a brief interaction with Captain Marvel, and I wasn't even trying to be a dick. I just like didn't automatically agree with her when she said something that impacts the relationship. And so now I'm going to see how that plays out in terms of like ramifications for in combat or effectiveness or something like that. I guess the only aspect of this that I have not enjoyed and I'm still not sold on is the RPG nature of your character, the hunter. I frankly, I think that character is pretty lame. I don't think it's cool. I don't think that I necessarily I understand why that's the direction they took, right? But I don't necessarily think that that's a fun character or am taken with their abilities or the performance of that character. It kind of reminds me of, the protagonist from the Mortal Kombat movie, the recent remake that they did, right? It's like a new character. He's basically a blank slate. It's your vessel into this world in the narrative. This is done better, but at the same time, it kind of just has this like generic create a character feel, and it's like this generic sort of swordsman character. And I don't necessarily think their ability, like especially their whip ability, that they can grab things and then like hurl them at enemies, is great so far. That's like a really useful one. So tactically, they are useful, but I think when you have this roster of some of the coolest, most badass characters ever in comic book history, and then I look over and I've got this like generic swordsman in silver armor or whatever, it's just kind of like it's a little deflating. And I do wish that it could be like the Marvel Ultimate Alliance almost, where it's like, yeah, it's just a squad of established heroes. Even if I understand at the end of the day, like what that approach facilitates for a game and giving it the sort of like RPG aspect to it.
Yeah, I think as well, if you're given control over one character, generally speaking, as well, if it's an established character, you've got the problem of, well, that character wouldn't do this with that character and blah, blah, blah. So it's trying to give you a blank slate without really giving you a blank slate in terms of obviously being voiced and stuff like that, which I think when you consider the cast is a lot of people who have performed as these characters in various things before. I mean, you've got Steve Bloom, who obviously played Wolverine all the way back to like the cartoon in the 90s. And you have, I mean, Josh Keaton and Yuri Lowenfeld have both played Peter Parker and Spider-Man and different things over the years. And I mean, even Michael Jai White being Blade, because I think he was the animated voice of Blade as well. So yeah, it's like these are people who are used to these roles, and I think Matt Mercer does the male version of the Hunter, and he's a solid voice actor, but obviously it just makes it hard to sort of form an identity. Like that's the big thing. Like I do think it does hurt the fact that you have so many people who are just reprising roles they've played before. I mean, even like I think it's Lyrica Akano who plays Nico. She played that character in live action for Runaways, one of the early sort of pre-Disney acquisition Marvel spin-off things. So it's like, it doesn't really give them much hope like for the main these sort of blank template characters, if you will. But I think they do their role, which is to you get to sort of hang out with all the heroes, and like they get to be your friends, and they like hanging out with you and stuff like that. And it's like it's fun like that. It's almost like playing Mass Effect in Marvel in terms of like just building relationships with these characters and having that fun time.
Yeah, it's not really souring my experience with it, because again, like tactically speaking, once I'm actually in the shit, it doesn't matter because of the fact that they have abilities that allow me to maximize the potential of the other two heroes that I bring with me. But I think when I get to like the story aspect, I'm more interested in like the other characters that I'm interacting with, rather than like understanding or even like creating my own story, if you will, as that sort of like blank slate. So outside of that, I think this game is like pretty phenomenal, and it breaks my heart a little bit that again, this is like yet another fantastic game that is more or less considered like a failure, because it is just so strong at what it sets out to do, and building upon again the developers established pedigree for turn-based strategy, but at the same time incorporating this card system that initially might seem limiting, but really that system is pretty flawless from what I've seen so far, especially like having the notion of redraws every turn, which is such a simple thing, but it does open up what initially seems like a constraint. And just, it really is all about empowering players to understand the best moments to utilize those and to save those at a given point in a turn. And even, I bitched earlier about players' ability to maneuver in the environment. I think the use of movement in this is really smart as well. That, it could be to get in range of something, or at the same time, it could be saving it for the end of a round and just repositioning in the overall environment, which so far haven't felt like the environment is restrictive at all, because of the fact that you have those various things in the environment that you can like hide behind, or you can utilize and open up the battlefield, or in some instances, like utilize a generator in a way early on that kind of like stuns an enemy, and all of a sudden you don't need a barrier between you because they can't move now for one turn or something like that. So I just find it's really, really smart design, and maybe in a few weeks when I've spent even more time with it, I can report back on utilizing some other characters and whatnot. But for now, really, really enjoying this, and wish I'd gotten to it sooner, which ends up being the case for anything you recommend me, and it takes me forever to get around to, but there it is.
I will say, if you haven't got the DLC yet, I'd get it anyway, like, because it slots into the main game anyway, like that, and you can, the way that the end game goes, you can kind of just procrastinate the end game a bit and get to those bits, just because also they take you in some interest. I mean, the Morbius stuff and that having fucking Dracula and things like that, and it's not talked about often because it's kind of a weird secret in the game, but like during the Magic storyline, it's like there's a very interesting voice cameo that just comes out of nowhere, that you listen to it and go, that sounds like, and then you hear it, and then you look up afterwards and get, fucking hell, that was the sort of thing. Like, it's cool, and like it's like just some great stunt casting in terms of just how perfectly done it was. But yeah, like the horror stuff is just like nice to see as well in like a Marvel game, and it just has that sort of dark edge in a sort of not safe way, but in a way that feels like apocalyptic because of the way they present it.
Well, I'm looking into it right now, and I can get the season pass for like $12. So that's an easy $12 spent.
Yeah, I mean, it gets you Venom in your team as well, and like it's a no-brainer.
I'll hopefully I can report back when my squad is got some more of the horror fellas in it. But I'm glad I finally got around to that one. Now I can just enjoy this while at the same time being pissed off that I don't know what Firaxis is going to do next. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be anything this Midnight Suns or XCOM related.
I don't know. We'll say that, and given the time of year it is, we'll probably come back next week and go, "Well, we were wrong."
I'm trying to will it into existence.
Yeah, that's it. It's like can't have all the good things, I guess. But like that would be, even if it isn't like everyone that was there before, it's like either one of those things would be nice. And just to have it on. I suspect it would be more likely XCOM than it would be Midnight Suns. But yeah, given licensing costs and how poorly that game did in terms of compared to other Marvel games.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll be eating our words sooner rather than later. But if not, as always, my friend, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at Safe Room Pod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.